This is TWiT.
The big story of the week is Apple versus Epic. And I've been kind of very interested in getting to this show and finding out what you all think of this. Because Apple basically said we lost. I mean, we won. Epic said we lost. But I think it's more complicated than that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's fascinating. So, and by the way, Epic has now appealed. So that's kind of goes along with we lost. Where they lost was Apple, the judge was unwilling to call Apple a monopoly. Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers ruled Friday Epic should pay damages to Apple for violating rules, but was unwilling to call Apple a monopoly. Both companies will bear the costs of their own cases, but I don't think it's exactly a loss, because the judge also said to Apple, you need to make some changes in your app store. And maybe it's fair to say this is the least Apple could have expected, or this has been what's coming all along. But it could have cost Apple billions of dollars. The judge says you have to let iOS apps use, quote, buttons, external links, or other calls to action that direct customers to purchasing methods other than Apple's payment system. And it strikes me that Apple may have won this battle, but they've lost the war. Mm-hmm. You agree, Brianna?
I don't know if I would go as far as say lost the war. I think big tech lost overall here. So I think if you are, you're skeptical about the amount of power, unchecked power, large technology companies have, you kind of won with this. I thought it was very interesting that the judge noted that, being very, very successful does not make you a monopoly, which the Apple Store certainly is. But I think the part of it I'm most worried about is it seems like this is opening up apps to all kinds of payment systems. I mean, if I want to put out a video game that has in-app purchases with Dogecoin, can I do that now? Because from my reading of this, I think I could. I really kind of worry about the scams that could come out with payment systems now.
Apple also wasn't sure what it means. They said it's too early to determine how or when exactly the changes will be implemented. They have 3 months. They said, we want to have conversations with the judge to find out what she means. But it's not even clear that it says allow third-party payment systems. But you just, on the least aggressive interpretation would be, say, in the Kindle app, which you've been prohibited from linking to Amazon's website to buy a book. They could now link to Amazon's website to buy a book. That would bypass Apple's 30%. Apple has prohibited that in the past. Lisa, you cover mobile.
Yes.
Apple said this is a victory. The court has affirmed what we've known all along. The App Store is not in violation of antitrust law, and success is not illegal. It's a resounding victory. Is it?
I don't think it's that simple. I think it's a little bit of both. I think the outcome definitely could have been a lot worse for Apple. I think if they were ordered to maybe, change the fee that they charge and lower it, like maybe that would have been a worse outcome. But I do think, we are going to see some ramifications from this, because don't forget, Apple makes a lot of money from the App Store. I think I might have to check this, but I think it's their second largest business after the iPhone. So, it's a big deal. And, I don't know exactly how much money Apple makes from the App Store. They don't break out that specific information, but I can probably only assume it's a lot, because
it's
a lot
billions.
of their other,
we know it's billions.
It's that, and iCloud subscriptions, I would imagine, especially considering a lot of their other services are still new. So this is a big deal for them. But I'm also curious about, you mentioned we don't know how Apple is going to implement this yet. And I think that's a big deal, because if it's something that's kind of cumbersome for developers to put into their apps, or if there are specific rules about where the call to action can be placed, or how big it is, consumers might not use it anyway. And then, they're still using in-app purchasing, because, a lot of this depends on how the consumer decides to purchase something through the app, right? So I think there's a lot of questions that are still up in the air about this for sure.
Carl, did Apple breathe a sigh of relief? I guess they did.
Yeah, I think worse. Like you guys, yeah, I think like you guys said, it's kind of a mixed bag. You know, they could have had it much worse. The court basically said that, you know, they could be a monopoly, you know, but that Epic really didn't prove that in the case. So the door is open here. And you still have all these other lawsuits against like Google, for example. And some of the, I don't know if you saw the unredacted Epic complaint against Google, but that includes some very interesting, more pointed. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
The unredacted Google complaint contains some information showing how they were actually paying wireless carriers
and game developers.
Yeah, they were paying wireless carriers something like 25% of the commission, you know, and that was right around 2010 when Google was starting to kind of drift away from its, you know, original founding vision, like it used to support net neutrality. And around 2010, you saw them kind of shift away from that. And the unredacted complaint Epic filed showed that Google is basically throwing money their direction, you know, billions of dollars to not try. So I think as you see more of these cases coming out and more of the antitrust inquiries with Linicon at the FTC, it's going to get complicated.
The Google, for instance, at one point thought about buying Epic. They were so worried.
Yeah, exactly.
They paid top game developers, including Activision Blizzard, not to leave the Google platform.
Yeah, and they were paying phone makers not to include competing app stores on the phone.
Yeah,
you know.
But that's the interesting point in this is that unlike the iPhone, there is a setting on Android devices that say use third-party app stores. So you don't have to use Google.
Right.
And I think Google probably doesn't worry about it so much because people just do what's easy. And I'm sure that's why Apple's not too worried about this. In fact, it makes you wonder why Apple fought so hard. Because people are just going to use Apple Pay. It's just easier.
Yeah, it works well.
I don't know
the system
about
is
that,
already.
though. No, go ahead. Sorry.
Finish, Carl.
You know, it works. The system works well, and it's already set up to give them a bunch of advantages. So I think a lot of people are going to still continue to use them, and I don't know. Plus, we're entering this phase now where they're going to debate about the definition of a button for 6 months, and then we have to see if people actually enforce anything. You know, so they've got a lot of runway here to tinker with.
Analysts don't know, and they won't say how much this could cost, billions. But how much? You know, how much is billions? According to Sensor Tower. Apple, from games alone, and mostly from in-app purchases, made $3.8 billion in 2020. But Brianna, you think that that's at risk or not?
I think a really good question to ask yourself with almost anything in technology is, hey, how would 4chan use this? So I would really encourage you to ask
You know that
yourselves,
from bitter experience that you should ask that question.
Right. So we're all assuming here rational actors, like we're thinking about our use case, right? Like, of course, I get the modal dialogue that comes up when I do my when I get an iPhone. I put in my credit card. Apple Pay is easy. That's what I go to. How would someone really deranged operate to exploit this rule? And I would encourage you guys to take a closer look at children's games on iOS, because I know it all started with that $99 Smurfberry thing.
Yeah.
It did not stop there.
Yeah.
So someone's calling me now on Skype. Oh my gosh.
When you say deranged, you don't mean Tim Sweeney. You mean other even more deranged people than the head of Epic. Yeah, I think that it's going to be interesting. If you go, let's say you're in the Kindle app or the Netflix app, and you say, I want to subscribe. I imagine what you'll see now is pay with Apple Pay, pay on the Netflix site, maybe equal-sized buttons. It depends what Apple allows them, but I think this is the spirit of the ruling. If it's 30% less, or maybe even only 15% less to pay on the Netflix website, maybe people will do that. But I think it's just so easy to go, pay with Apple, does the face recognition, it's done. I'm sure Apple's assuming the vast majority of people, this won't be a change.
I think that's right. And Epic called it a loss, but it's not. When you consider this is probably the biggest change to be implemented in the Apple Store in, I don't know, its history, perhaps. I think that's something. You know, it's not exactly like that's nothing.
Well, and it may be worse coming. I mean, South Korea is making Apple put other app stores on the phone in South Korea. Yeah. The same thing may happen in other countries. It's it's on the table in many countries. So
And
Apple's
then you layer on these other antitrust inquiries, and I think there's there's a real sea change happening here. I don't know if it'll result in anything, but it's moving that direction.
well, that's
Yeah, and I think that's. Oh, sorry,
Go ahead,
Leo.
Lisa,
I was just going to
please.
say, Karl, I think that's what makes this so interesting too, is because this is really one of the first times that we are seeing, the type of action that would be taken, in an antitrust case like this. Like you were saying, there's a lot of concerns right now and a lot of different, lawsuits and cases that are and issues that are being raised. And I feel like this is kind of like our first peek into like what, how the country is like thinking about, the modern, antitrust situation in big tech today. And I think that's really interesting.
I mean, you consider that first decade from 2000 to 2010, it was all about innovation and how miraculous and amazing all the technologies were. And then like right around the 2010 point, people started to think a little more deeply about some of this stuff. Like, how do I moderate content at scale? What does the gatekeeper power on the phone device actually mean? People started to actually notice. And I think we've finally, just in the last maybe year or two, started to see some actual action, in terms of even the GOP and both parties being interested in kind of reining in some big tech stuff.
But remember, I think you've covered this, how much money big tech telecoms pay Congress to keep them in check. I'm always suspicious about anything significant happening from Congress.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the problem with antitrust reform, is it's so broad and it impacts so many companies that you get just this massive coalition of companies across industries all funneling all their money towards one thing, which is not any expansion of existing antitrust law. And it's hard to beat that. If you're, the opponents in that case are going to be consumer groups and activists and academics, and, they're outgunned, they're outfunded. So it's going to be hard. I think there is a sea change here, but whether it actually ends in any meaningful antitrust reform is really
it
quite a big
seems more
question.
likely to happen in the EU than it does in the US.